So I guess since I started as a journalist, it's not really a approved career by the family member because it's quite dangerous. In 2007, you can imagine.
Hello and welcome to episode 35 of What's Happening in Myanmar, a weekly show from the Frontier Myanmar podcast family. I'm your host, Luke Corbin. It's Friday, July 11, and in the studio we have outgoing Frontier Editor-in-Chief Ben Dunant and incoming Frontier Editor-in-Chief Thu Thu Aung. This is a special behind-the-scenes episode where we'll hear Ben's reflections on his time at Frontier before he's gone and Thu Thu's background and plan for the future of the organisation. You might notice my voice is a bit funny. I was knocked out by a pretty nasty flu this week, and it's still hanging around. That's why this episode is a little bit late, and why there's no news section. It was a big week in the news. We had Min Aung Hlaing and Donald Trump exchanging letters, really big problems and territorial exchanges between Chin resistance groups. There was intense fighting in Pakant and around Nam Cho. And on my first count, there were at least 50 civilians killed by military airstrikes and shelling this week. But I need to save myself for next week, so instead of talking about the news, let me simply remind you that Frontier Myanmar's daily briefing newsletters cover the week's news and more. If you're not already a member, consider joining and lending your support. Frontier journalists and editors work really hard to give you accurate, verified information every day, to give you the context you need to make sense of what's happening in Myanmar. Okay, so here we are, straight into it. Welcome Thu Thu Aung and welcome Ben Dunant. It's great to have you both here for this episode.
Hey Luke, really nice to be back.
Thank you for inviting me too.
Now I'll embarrass you both by giving some quick bios for the listeners. Thu Thu Aung started reporting in 2007 and covered that year's protest movement, then Cyclone Nargis, and of course the politics and the peace process between 2011 and the coup. She joined the Yangon Bureau of Reuters in 2017, and with Reuters was part of investigations for a Pulitzer Prize-winning series on atrocities against the Rohingya. Thu Thu Aung has also won prizes at the Society of Publishers in Asia Awards, the Human Rights Press Awards, and the Amnesty International Media Awards. Then, outgoing Editor-in-Chief Ben Dunant joined Frontier first in 2018 as Chief of Staff, and then became Managing Editor and finally Editor-in-Chief in 2022. Particularly since 2022, Ben has steered the Frontier newsroom through uncharted waters as it relocated out of Myanmar in the wake of the 2021 coup and subsequent violence. The momentum that Frontier has achieved since then, with its features, while maintaining editorial integrity and balance, is in no small part an outcome of Ben's dedication and hard work. So Ben, starting there, how did you end up in Myanmar originally and join Frontier?
So I moved to Myanmar in 2014. I was working for an NGO from the US called the Carter Center, and that was establishing an election observation mission, for the big election that then happened the following year in 2015. So I was one of their field people. I was based in Shan State, and although that wasn't journalism, it was a very immersive experience. I was really completely new to the country. I mean, I'd been on a short visit previously. And then that job that continued on to the election in late 2015, and then for a little bit afterwards. And then when that mission wound down, I needed to find a new job. And I had dabbled in journalism a little bit before, but wanted to do more. There was a job as a copy editor with the Irrawaddy going. So I jumped on that, worked for the Irrawaddy a little bit. And then over the next few years, did that as well as a bit of freelancing, a brief stint as a copy editor at Myanmar Now as well. And then I joined Frontier in 2018. And the rest is history.
Now that era feels like a world away. Media censorship was almost entirely abolished by then. Newspapers were popping up and disappearing. Foreign and Myanmar journalists were all over the cities. What was it like for you at that time?
Well, when I moved to Myanmar, in 2015, that was kind of the high watermark of optimism about the country. The international narrative about the country was pretty optimistic in the main. But among a lot of local people involved in politics too. I mean, I think what I remember from meeting a lot of political party people and activists in the run-up to the election in 2015 was there were a lot of wariness and skepticism about whether that election would be free and fair, whether the reforms were genuine. But nonetheless, people were willing to take part. I spoke to a lot of people who were very skeptical going into the election, but they still registered as candidates for the election. The NLD, for instance, was really kind of going for it, and of course won very, very big in that election. And then I think when the election went the way that it did with a landslide victory to the NLD, that was seen as a really important milestone and contributed to a pretty optimistic mood in the country. I mean, it wasn't uniform. There war was continuing in Kachin State, for instance, and various other parts of the country. There was the Rohingya crisis in Rakhine State that would escalate massively quite soon after that. But on the whole, there was a general sense that with the politics, there might be, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But, things are broadly moving in the right direction, and it would be kind of crazy for things to go back to how they were before the reforms. So although, it wasn't certainly entirely safe being a journalist, there were lots of problems with press freedom. You could still go to jail for doing your job, and several people were. There's certainly just the range of possibilities on what you could do, felt very new. And it was a time when the economy was growing as well. So, it felt like a lot was happening. And as a foreigner who, moved to the country and was gradually learning about it, it was exciting to be a part of it and, to contribute to it in like a small way.
And by then, Thu Thu, you had already had a long career as a journalist.
So, Ben, as Ben describes, it's a really exciting and significant time in Myanmar journalism landscape, especially 2011 to 2021 before the coup. So it's opening up, we have a lot of journalist training, and also we even have a journalism training center, government, and also a lot of media professional trained in that period. It's really exciting time. But I started my journalism career in 2007, right before the Saffron revolutions. I joined to a local media outlet as a journalist. At the time, I just finished my graduate degree in economics, and I studying Chinese at the Yangon Language University. So I just think that, okay, I will join for 6 months, and I joined as a journalist. And I saw the Saffron Revolution, wow, that's a good career. And because you can report to people. Because as a Myanmar citizen, we grew up under the censorship, and we were brainwashed. And we don't really know about that. I was even inside the affair inside the country. So I just really astonished by that journalism, and the journalist just killed in front of me in 2007, that Japanese journalist. I just why not stick in that career? So since then I was a journalist, and I joined several media outlets, including Myanmar Times, ARE before I joined Reuters. So I can see the really good move in that period that Ben is mentioning, 10-year opening period, and we have a lot of qualifying journalists now because of that opening period.
Thanks, Thu Thu. And Ben, why did you end up, choosing to work at Frontier?
I was interested in joining Frontier because it did a kind of magazine style journalism that I really liked. I'd grown up reading current affairs magazines. I liked more long form stuff. I'd always been interested in working at such a magazine, and I was working in Myanmar, of course. So Frontier felt like the perfect fit then, really. So I was very excited to get a job there and to start. And I remember, I joined in an editorial role, but I was able to do quite a lot of reporting as well. I was able to travel around to different parts of the country and report some interesting stories on the ground. One memorable one I did on the mismanagement of Inle Lake, which was quite a fun one to report because I got to crisscross the lake on boats in order to meet people to interview. But, it was, there was a lot going on there, as a microcosm of, the challenges of decentralizing power, managing environmental resources, certain ethnic groups feeling that they'd lost out, were competing with other groups and so on. Like all those issues are, of course, relevant across the whole country, but they are kind of crystallized to some extent in the dilemma of how to manage the lake. So being able to work on those pieces that took a bit more time, you weren't just trying to keep track of the news agenda, get out lots of quick reporting, having the space and freedom to do that was very satisfying. And, I found that I learned a lot doing that. I was lucky to work with an exceptional team of Burmese journalists. There was a great environment in the newsroom. It was a lot of fun to go there each day, sort of newsroom environment, working in a team like that was very enjoyable and satisfying. And it's so right, really.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I have to say also, though, one of the worst tragedies during that time really rocked the public sphere in Myanmar, challenged the media, was the violence, ethnic cleansing directed at Rohingya people in Rakhine State in 2017. I mean, that led to these huge refugee camps in Bangladesh that I still talk about most weeks on this podcast, that they shelter over 1 million people. And just today, the United Nations Refugee Agency said essential services in those camps are at risk of collapsing. So at the beginning of all of that, Thu Thu, you were involved in reporting on the military's massacre of Rohingyas for Reuters in 2017. And some of that reporting, went on to receive the Pulitzer, as I said earlier. And two of your colleagues, Walon and Jo So-u, were actually arrested and charged after being entrapped by police.
Yeah, so I joined Reuters a couple of months after the Rohingya crisis, before Walon and Jo So-u were arrested. So Walon also were doing like a kind of like in-depth interview with people in the area, went into the area, and the police suspect that we are doing something, but they don't know what we are doing, and they set up to arrest these two journalists. And they found out that we are doing the Rohingya, we are covering the Rohingya issue, and they find the court case against two journalists. But my colleagues were really brave to allow us to publish a story, and then also the office really concentrate and put a lot of resources on covering the long form issue. And I met Ben occasionally at the court in Say. Yeah, that where we met each other the first time. Yeah. And they were relieved, and we have to like run away for a couple of times before we publish the stories, and like we come back after that. We are sure that they won't arrest us. So like it's like in and out of the country for covering these stories. That's quite a challenging time. Yeah.
As Ruthie was saying, we first met in the courthouse in Insane Township, and that trial, which went on over a number of months. I mean,
it's like over 1 year.
Yes, no, it went on for a long time. And we were both regularly attending the court hearings, which were very shambolic. I mean, in a way that unfortunately is quite typical of the justice system there. A lot of judgments just appear to be kind of handed down. Although there are a lot of important reforms in the country, the judiciary was largely unreformed. So I think what we saw in that trial, I mean, it was a travesty, but it was unfortunately not exceptional. The only thing that was exceptional about it was the global media coverage that it received, both because these were two Reuters journalists, but also because it sort of signified in a very powerful way that although the country had come a long way in like many ways, although there were a lot of new important freedoms, press freedom had expanded, there were very hard limits to those freedoms, and particularly regarding the Rohingya crisis, which was an extremely sensitive issue. I mean, it's one that was very polarizing within the country, and I think something that the NLD government was not really prepared for either. In that sense, it was kind of a perfect storm. And although it showed the limitations and contributed to a sense that there was a crisis of press freedom, that was all put in perspective, though, by the coup that would happen a few years later. Like it felt at that time that things were in crisis, but, compared to the non-existent press freedoms that exist now, that era was still like a golden age, really, in the history of Myanmar media.
I can add some more to it. So like at the time, it's like kind of like a gray area, but the journalists knew where, how can they cover, and like after the coup, like no journalist, no independent journalist can stay inside the country, or like only undercover journalists can stay in the country. So at that time, it's like, oh, you don't touch this issue like Rohingya, but you can report on other stuff like corruption or something like that. But yeah, there's a limit to the NLD government, and so we can really see that in that period.
Doing this kind of journalism, groundbreaking journalism about the Rohingya must have been pretty hard for you and your colleagues, Thu Thu, given the public sentiment at that time. So many people either didn't care that nearly 1 million Burmese-born people had been forced from their homes into a foreign country, or worse, they themselves actively discriminated against Rohingya people and supported the military operation. That meant, of course, that journalists covering the crimes against the Rohingya, like you, were often viewed with suspicion. How did you manage that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. At the time when we are reporting Wallonja, so we have a lot of haters inside our community, like among, like a very close cycle, like friends and family members. Sometimes they cannot really understand what is happening. I think that's the lack of the information, like they cannot really receive the information that we are receiving. And also like there's like a need to report on the Rohingya issue by the local journalists in Burmese or like in ethnic languages. But it is understandable journalists didn't have resources to like go to the Rakhine area, and also the government limit the access to the area. So yeah, that's really difficult. Sometimes we were portrayed as traitors, so on and on, and that was really difficult time. But I do believe that we need to report on what is happening, and we need to tell what is happening in the country, and like you are going to the wrong way, even though we are a minority of the people who talking about it. Yeah, that's really important. But after the coup, and people perception change, and some people apologize for what was happening in Rakhine and so on and on. And like many journalists now, like they support righteous journalists, and like we did that. We did the right thing, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, exactly. History has actually proven you right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like within a short time, I didn't expect that they will have a kind of like a possession, like a chain within the short period of time. But now like it's happened, so that's quite good.
Yeah, that is quite good. Before we give up on this one though, I want to ask you, how did you cope? Like, how did you cope at the time?
So I guess since I started as a journalist, it's not really a approved career by the family member, because it's quite dangerous in 2007, you can imagine. And but I believe in what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. So it's not really, I don't really need to, there might be like you have to have like I think like close network of people who will support you. That's maybe like somehow you can go through and like continue the job. But I do believe that we need to do the thing that we feel is right. Yeah.
Thank you. Well put. Now I'm going back to you, Ben. You've been the editor-in-chief the whole time that Frontier has been based here in Chiang Mai. So how did you end up in the top job, and what have the challenges been of running a newsroom in exile?
As I said earlier, I started as the chief of staff at Frontier, but then became the managing editor, and that's the role I had at the time when I left Myanmar in 2021, and then the rest of the newsroom followed, and I took a bit of a break from Frontier's sabbatical in late 2021, and then resumed part-time in 2022, and then in the middle of that year, Tom Keane, the previous editor-in-chief, who done a really amazing job at the magazine, since 2016. He was then living in Australia. He wanted to pass on the role. So we talked about that, and I agreed to take on that role in September 2022. And I was very excited to take on that role, although it was a daunting task, partly because the challenges of reporting in an accurate and conscientious way from Thailand is quite severe. I mean, essentially, you can still do it, with modern communications. You're able, using secure channels, to communicate with lots of people in the country, although certainly not all, because the military junta has used internet blackouts as a counterinsurgency tactic. And so while it is still possible, it is certainly very challenging. I find that good reporting is still possible. It takes a while, though, and I think at Frontier, we have being more magazine style, we have the luxury of taking a little more time to do our stories. So I feel like while we can still kind of get there, it can take a long time. It can be a slow and frustrating process, particularly if you're reporting on conflict areas such as in Rakhine State, where there are these sweeping internet blackouts. In fact, the challenges of this was described in a behind-the-scenes email that was sent to members, I believe, sometime last year by our reporter Heimthar, reporting on a massacre in Sagaing region, talking to local people. It was a case of talking to one person who was in a market town in Sagaing, who then went on a scooter to go and meet someone else. And this phone was, passed through various hands, and it was a very convoluted process in order to be able to speak someone who had witnessed the massacre in question. So, trying to kind of cut through the fog of war, cut through the various kind of narratives that are out there and can cloud a clear vision of what is happening. It's possible, but it takes a while.
And how do you see the wider context that you're stepping into with the top job, Thu Thu? The Myanmar media has really taken a beating this year, in particular with the United States terminating its funding for its agency for global media. That's really hurting independent outlets.
So now we are in a very difficult time again. And especially for the long-term sustainability of the media house, how will we sustain ourselves without the fundings or without the revenue system? How we will survive is a big question. And I think also we also need to retain the talents in the industry. Also we also have to train new generation of journalists. That's also another thing for the long term, sustaining a free press in Myanmar, which is really important. So we are in a crisis, but we will survive, and Myanmar media have survived in the past, and now we will survive too. Yeah, that's the main reason that I joined Frontier Myanmar, because Frontier Myanmar is doing a really great job, and they did achieve amazing stuff in the past 4 years, or maybe 10 years. Yeah. But especially after the 2021 is what difficult time, very challenging time. And Frontier Myanmar did amazing job, and Ben did amazing job. So I'm really excited too. And I really committed to stay Frontier Myanmar, stay safe and strong and impactful. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be leaving the magazine in such great and accomplished hands. Although I am sad to be leaving after such a long time, I am also just really excited to see what you will do in your role, Thu Thu, and you've got some great colleagues to work with. And I'm very excited as a Frontier subscriber rather than a member of staff to see what you guys do.
And on that, Thu Thu Aung, what do you see? What are a couple of the big issues that you might see making the headlines soon in Frontier?
So what we what we would like to focus on is like a geopolitical issue and also the transnational cross-border like organized crime issue. I would like to focus more on is a global significance and impacting a lot of people, not only in the region, also globally. So I would like to focus more on that. And also the original people in the country, how were they perceived and like getting the information and what kind of thing that we need to like deliver to the people inside the country. So like, we'll explore on that matter too.
That sounds great. Now, Ben, is there any regrets from your time at Frontier? Or anything you're particularly proud of?
Ooh, well, that's a tough one. I mean, of course, with unlimited resources, we have to be quite choosy in what we report on. So there's always a sense of regret that you're choosing some topics and not others. You're essentially like making a bet on this being a big issue or a worthwhile focus, for the organization. Or the story that you're working on, and sometimes you're kind of vindicated and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you might realize a little bit too late that you've overlooked an important issue. Hands up, I didn't expect far in advance that the coup would happen. I think like in the weeks up to the coup, there were these like signs that it would happen. And then I was fearful as everyone else. But I think, if you had asked me a year before the coup, I would not have expected it. So obviously I would wish in hindsight that I'd read the signs a little better, but I know I'm not the only person who didn't see that coming far in advance, even if, in the weeks and days leading up to the event, it did seem that it was on its way. But I think, any sense of regret is overwhelmed with a sense of, the experience just being very rewarding. I do like working in a team. I like working with colleagues that I respect, and achieving great things with them. And Frontier has had many fine journalists pass through its doors, and it still has an incredible team, which is why I look forward to see what it does. I think, the whole Myanmar media ecosystem is very important, but I think that Frontier fulfills a particular niche. Like the daily news reporting is important, but I think our focus on more long form magazine style reporting, it helps to fill a gap. It provides a type of story that you don't read much elsewhere, and I think that focus can, I hope at least, contribute to a more nuanced understanding of issues in the country that are often very kind of complicated, that are often, once you start to dig into them, the narratives that you began with, they might fall apart or be complicated in some ways. So I think that process made it feel very rewarding, and it felt like we were adding some value to the ecosystem and the factual record.
Well, this is great chat, but I feel like it's been just the tip of the iceberg. And the good news is that Thu Thu and Ben are actually taking this show on the road. If you're a Frontier member, you're invited to Frontier's upcoming 10-year birthday celebrations. They start next week, Friday evening, July 18 in Bangkok, and then July 25 in Chiang Mai. And the Chiang Mai event has got a special interactive exhibit. Now, Ben, Thu Thu, and other Frontier staff will be at the events. So check your email and be sure to RSVP, come along and have a chat. Anything to add there?
So we're having these anniversary events, and, you're all warmly invited to them, and I hope to see you there.
Looking forward to seeing you and other people.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good luck with the handover. I really enjoyed being here to be part of this introduction on the podcast of Thu Thu Aung, our new editor-in-chief. And yeah, thanks, guys.
It's been a real pleasure, and I am excited to see what Frontier does next.
See you. Goodbye.
And listeners, really, thanks again for keeping up with what's happening in Myanmar and for putting up with my voice today. We love your questions and feedback on this show, so why don't you email us? whimyanmar@proton.me. Now, there's some timely new content up on the Frontier website since the last episode. The first is on the TNLA's and National Liberation Army's defiance as the military slowly advances on Naung Chau. And the second is about the deadly conflict between Chin resistance armies that broke out over the last week. They're both really worth reading. And members, keep an eye on your inboxes this Sunday for a new political insider. Until next week, farewell and take care.